This is a channeling from Beryl Markham. She was the first woman to fly west across the Atlantic solo. You can look her up and find out the year she did it, as well as find her amazing book. It's called West with the Night. And when I read that book, I was so moved that I said, I have got to go talk to this woman. So I prepared myself in meditation. Yeah, almost immediately I heard, "Over here, dearie, over here." She seems to be in a very idealized natural setting. It is a house with a veranda and a gorgeous view, which I can sense more than I can see it. There's a square hassock made out of reeds that I sit on. And I look to see what age her representation is. She's in her 30s, she said. I decided to be your age so we could have a little chat. She says she's been expecting me. She is very aware of the people who take great interest in her life. And she is so thrilled and so energized by people's remembering of her and praise and interest in her life. She's having great fun with that. She can really see and sense and feel her popularity. The recognition that she's enjoying is pure and cleaner and clearer than the adulation that she received after her flight. She said, yes, I did enjoy the parties, the food, dressing up after her flight. In this country, meaning America particularly, I asked Beryl, do you have an understanding now of the choices that led you to such an incredibly complex and interesting series of accomplishments in your life? And she said, the biggest accomplishment was keeping a roof over my head and food in my mouth. You can't imagine what it was like for me. It was a constant effort. There was a lot of terror and fear in me. The fear would never let go of me. I had it for my entire life. And that terror, just day-to-day living, was such a struggle that never to let go of that fear drove her life's accomplishment. That terror was very deep, and she believes it was from the abandonment by her mother at such a young age, and then the abandonment by her father in different steps or stages. She realized she was never as important to him as he was to her, and it was abandonment in small ways. He even built a little house for her as a teenager apart from the main house, which she interpreted as rejection, as a shutting out. And so I was terribly insecure all throughout my life. That insecurity translated itself not as much in my relationships, because none of my interpersonal relationships could have even scratched the surface of the terror that I felt for my daily bread. There was a depth in me that no other person could penetrate. People thought I was superficial, but what they were sensing was the terror that was at the core of me that could not be assuaged by any person on earth. She continues, I do feel that if your parents do not give you the comfort and security and the love, there isn't anyone else in the world that can do it. That's a very critical time when you're a child. And I was doomed to repeat history with my own son. However, there were loving people around him, his grandmother in particular, who made him feel secure with her love. And he can accept love to a much greater depth than I ever could. She said that was really it, accepting the love of a really good man. I knew I could not let in his love. And we would have had most desired this for our entire life. He knew I could not take him in because I was so flawed inside, so filled with my terror. And she is referring to a man named Tom. They were not married, but he wove in and out of her life, pretty much her whole life. And I believe at one point she was married to someone else, if my memory serves me. But Tom was her true, I don't want to say companion, but champion. Back to Beryl. It was this terror that drove me. It was my handicap and my motivating force for so much of what I did in my life. I do believe now that the greatness, the achievements I sought were to somehow erase that terror, to win the caregiving of my father particularly, but it never did. There was never enough that I could do. He was the only one that could have released me from that pain and that fear. And there was nothing that I could ever do in my life that could make him erase that from my very soul. I really do not now think he understands his importance to me. And then when I think that I lived an entire life based on certain assumptions that were so predicated on the attitudes of other people, he and my mother particularly, I see that a good deal of my energy was wasted with that. I was not sufficient unto myself on so many levels. I really squandered a tremendous amount of self-energy on that pain and that fear. At this point, I'm not high enough yet to know what the overall plan for that life was. I'm still staying close by, and I'm very encouraged by the remarkable admiration for my life and its achievements. I'm very much enjoying that, reveling in that, and dipping into places where people are interested in me like yourself. So I asked her, well, what about Tom? And so she says, at first he was there when I died. In fact, he had been there quite a bit in my old age. He had been near me quite a lot, but I just didn't realize it. She said, when I died, he was right there, and I just flew into his arms. And we worked and sorted everything out, and then he had to go back to his own work. But she says, I feel so much acceptance and so much the satisfaction of my accomplishments now. I'm feeling so good within myself, more than I ever did in the best moments in my body. So I say, well, did you actually lift that terror in terms of your physical welfare? I mean, you did keep yourself housed and clothed. And she laughs and says, yes, with the help of a lot of other people. I know I shouldn't have worried so much, but I just couldn't help it. That kind of fear can eat you alive. I was very sensitive, too sensitive actually. Horses and dogs were the only creatures I could let myself open up to. There is nothing I miss about being in a body. Although if you can tell people that that was a lovely celebration and I enjoyed every minute of it, what she's referring to here is the 50th anniversary of her flight. And tell Lila, here she says, it must be her publisher. She was so pleased with the outcome, the way her book was published. She says, of course I wrote West with the Night. No one else could have. Her husband suggested I keep some parts in and leave other parts out. And what the very best stories were. Sometimes I would speak the book and dictate it to him. I would tell it as if I was sitting at the campfire telling a story in Africa. That was a better way for me to write. But of course I wrote that. It was my life. She says it's more satisfying to have left that book, West with the Night, than to have left her flight record, because the book is pure art, not a physical accomplishment. It was an artistic accomplishment, and so it will endure. So I asked her what she's going to do now, and she says she doesn't know. She's just really enjoying being tuned in and accessing the energy that's coming from the planet to her. And she's also very interested in keeping tabs on her grandchildren. At that point, I had to excuse myself to get a glass of water. When I came back, she said, I should have offered you something. I'd say, I wanted just to chat with you about your work. She says, you're the first visitor I've had up here. I've watched people, but nobody's actually come to visit. I was explaining to her a little bit about what I do. And I joked with her because the idea of a glass of water would not have helped me, which is, the afterlife just seems so real. She continues, my death was not very difficult. I even willed it at the end. Yes, I went through an ambivalent phase. When you're old, not caring if you live or die, not being able to focus on what you really want. And then I broke my hip, and I knew I'd be in bed longer than I cared to be. So I willed myself to die. It's interesting how the will to live sustained me through so much of my life. I was in life threatening situations any number of times. I had a terrific bout with malaria that should have killed me, but my will to live was so strong. She said she slipped away very gracefully into her after death state. It was not a trauma to her. She rose up out of her body, slipped out of it, looked at it like her body was a cocoon. She remembers thinking that at the time, like a butterfly coming out of the chrysalis. And she rose tall and graceful once more. And she was really grateful for the feeling of a young body with all its gracefulness. And then, of course, she hung around to make sure that the old carcass was disposed of properly. Shortly thereafter, there was a great celebration up in London that she went to. She stayed, watched, and viewed the family. I'm telling her, I saw your son's name in a book called Naming the Animals. And she said, yes, I enjoy seeing his athletic prowess with horses. He's quite a fine athlete. And he's in synchronicity with horses. That's in his breeding. And you know, he was brought up English. It's much more common there for horses to be treated as fellow creatures and not objectified as they were in my own country. And she means Africa. She was brought up in South Africa. And so the combination of his natural, almost biological affinity for the animal and his English upbringing, no doubt fostered such a caring and effectiveness as a rider, handler, and trainer. She really does not feel the continuity of herself through her family. The legacy she feels she did leave on the planet was the book, which was her life story. And she looks at me and says, which was one hell of a story.